Hello and welcome to this latest interview in the Consulta Specialist series. Today I am joined by Anna Marsden, who is from Luminescence Communication Limited, and I love this expression, humanising communication and learning for the 21st century. So Anna specialises in digital communications and also LGBTQ plus awareness, and that is our topic for today's interview. So hi Anna, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi Susanna, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
So let's start the conversation off without making an assumption that the audience actually knows or understands any of the terminology around LGBTQ plus. So, because I know I didn't, it was only after seeing a presentation that you did that I actually really just started to understand more. And as you know, I also have a 12-year-old daughter. She educates me all the time as well, because this is very much more kind of in her awareness. So firstly, what is the difference between sex, gender and attraction?
That is a great question, and I'm glad that you were listening when I was doing my spotlight session, because that's where I tend to start when I'm delivering any LGBTQ awareness. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer or questioning, we can get to that later. So in my trainings, we always start with the difference between sex, gender and attraction. And the reason that that's important is because we conflate sex and gender. So sex is what we know or we think we know about the biological, physiological anatomy of the body. So that's in your sex organs, your chromosomes, what's actually written on your body. That is interpreted through culture, but what is on your body, how we are, again, with our anatomy, physiology, chromosomes, that's sex. Gender is our the representation of how we express and how we feel, and it's traditionally been in a non-binary conformity. So you're either a man or a woman. Now, gender is actually how we want to perform and be in the world. It's not necessarily related to what's in your pants. It's not related to your sex. It is related to how you want to, and I use the word perform. Anyone who wants to do any further reading, if you can read Judith Butler, you get extra gold stars for me, because Judith Butler in the 90s started to talk about gender performativity, because that's what we do. It's culturally and socially constructed gender. Mm-hmm. When you look across different cultures, the way that men or women are known to be differs. And that's because culture informs gender. So sex written on the body, gender is how we perform. Now you might say, I'm here with my short hair, my specs. It might be that you think I might look a bit masculine, a bit butch. That's my gender. That has nothing to do with my sex. Attraction is who you are emotionally, physically, or even socially attracted to. So it doesn't need to be sexually attracted. It could be emotionally, sexually, and socially attracted to. What we tend to do in a heteronormative world, so in a world where you associate being a man with being masculine, with being attracted to women, in that very heteronormative world, we think that is the right, the normal, the typical experience. So what I try and do in my LGBT awareness classes right off the bat is look at these concepts and how they differ, and how some people experience the world as a man who's masculine, who's attracted to women, and other people experience the world as a man who's more feminine, who's attracted to other men. Every one of us has sex, every one of us has gender, and every one of us has an attraction. So that's kind of my first introduction into LGBT awareness, is that we all hold these identities. It's not other. When we talk about, gay awareness, it's not about understanding other, it's about understanding us as well. So yeah, that's where we start off, and I get people to play a little game of the alphabet soup and see what labels and what names belong in what categories, and that really starts to open up the conversation.
Yeah, and I remember doing that in your session actually, and also my daughter, she comes home with almost new words all of the time, and it's like, okay, well, so what does that mean, and where does that fit? You know, is that gender, or is that sex, or is that attraction, and so on. So, okay, so I suppose in terms of kind of the audience and so on, and actually, so because what we're talking about in the context of software adoption and customer experience, we're talking about being inclusive, aren't we? And talking to an audience. So why should software companies care about this? You know, from I suppose the statistics, the kind of the legal and ethical side of things. You know, why even bother having this conversation?
That's a good question. And I think, why bother having a conversation about the audience, the users that will use your software? Because they are the people that will be making you money. They'll be the people that are using your softwares, that will be your customers. So in order to connect with them and make sure that you're not only delivering on your software, but you're engaging with them in a way that they appreciate and feel valued. If you talk to, or say in your databases, you have binary options, male, female. If you have title options as Mr. and Mrs. and no others, that's constraining and restraining how you know how to speak to and address your customers, because you're just giving them the binary option. Actually, I have a really good story. This was a couple of years ago. A friend of mine who's a doctor, so their title is not Mr. or Mrs., it's doctor, was locked out of Pure Gym. And I'm not sure if you heard this story when it happened a couple of years ago. They couldn't get into the changing room at Pure Gym because the software aligned doctor with man. Doctor's not man, doctor's doctor.
Yes.
And my female doctor friend was not allowed access through the card because she's a doctor. And the software said doctor equals man, not allowed in female changing room. So there's things like that, like you might not think that would be important, but if you're creating software that gives people access to different spaces and it's based on a title which assumes sex, then that's really, really important to know and get the terms right and understand that doctor doesn't just mean man, it means man and woman. So I was laughing with her the other day about that because, I mean, I was laughing. She wasn't, because she couldn't get into the gym. But it's important. Say if you're working as a customer service, to know the pronoun, to know how people are want to be talked to and talked about. So my pronouns are she, her. Anna, I am female and my gender is feminine. Might be a bit more butch than we might think, but I am feminine in my gender expression, and I'm female in my sex. I'm also just happen to be attracted to women, so I'm gay, I'm a lesbian. So you can see here, sex, gender, and attraction don't align for me in the same way potentially as someone who is straight or heterosexual. But my pronouns are about my gender expression. So she, her tells other people that you can refer to me as she, her. If I wanted to say to someone, I want you to recognize who I am, and when you're talking about me, she doesn't fit for me. They fit, because I'm not he, I'm not she, I'm not an either or, I'm not binary. And it doesn't, either it doesn't matter or it matters hugely. It doesn't matter for me, or it matters hugely. I don't want you to refer to me as with male pronouns and masculine pronouns or feminine pronouns. They, plural, is a much better fit for me. If in your software you have your titles and then you have your pronouns, when someone from customer service is talking to that person, they will refer to the person with the right pronouns. And if you're talking to your customers in the way that they want to be talked to, you'll have a much better rapport and trust. So that is becoming much more important. And we've seen it online, as we've all had to be over the past 2 years, people put their pronouns in, and that's to help other people advocate for who they are. As straight people, I think it's a massive step forward in advocacy to say these are my pronouns, because it allows space for someone else to say what their pronouns are, and they can be either, well, there's lots of them. There's neo pronouns, which I won't get into, but there's he, him, she, her, and they, them. And that, I think, is really important for people to see someone else. And again, we all know, whether you're creating software, whether you're deep in the IT sector, we all do work and business with people. And so you really have to be able to connect with the people that are your service users.
Fabulous. So there's a few things that I've kind of picked up on from what you said. So we've got the elements in terms of software design, and a key one, which in a lot of systems will have, is that salutation. My understanding is that what we need to be adding as standard now is the option of MX.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So MX. So Mr., Mrs., Doctor, for those very clever folk amongst us.
Professor, Reverend,
Exactly, all of these. Yeah. And this is the diversity part of inclusion, is the more we know of people that are different to us, the better we can perform in terms of our businesses, because we are connecting with those people. But MX stands for a salutation that has no reference to gender. So MX could be used for me, it could be used for you. It doesn't tell me that you are a man or a woman. It says, it states gender free. And actually my default, the more I've done the trainings, the LGBT trainings over the past 20 years, more words have appeared for sure. Words have come back round in usage. But the thing that I noticed the most is that people are fearful of getting it wrong. But we, again, live in this either or, man or woman, masculine, feminine. But if you look at your group of friends, the people that you know, quite a lot of us live in that middle space. So how offensive is it? How wrong is it to refer to someone as they before you know how they might perform their gender? Because we all experience life in this gender continuum. Some of us are at one end, some of us are at the other, but I think a lot of us are in the middle.
Yeah.
So I think that you can't offend someone by referring to them as them, as I did with the example with my friend from the Pure Gym, the doctor, they. You still knew who I was talking about, but my reveal in that story was because she is a doctor. So I think that that just helps unlock how we cannot stereotype people when it's not applicable for them.
And I think it also really helps us kind of get round, you touched on it, those awkward situations of, quite often names that you don't know anyway, just based on what we've talked about, but you're trying to say, so someone fills in, I don't know, an online form, but salutation isn't in there, but then you kind of need to have it for whatever reason. So you've got to make an assumption unless you've got that option that allows you to just go, well, I'm just going to assume kind of the middle until that person has the opportunity to tell me otherwise. And I think it takes away all that awkwardness for the person that's having to kind of fill in that information, doesn't it?
There's no fear in asking people as well. I think it's really, it's hard to know how it feels to be marginalized and othered until you are, or until you witness it and you think, oh, that doesn't feel very nice. All of the women and all of the people that identify as feminine and female, if you play board games, if you've ever played, I'm not sure if I've said this to you before, Susanna, but if you are a board game fan, I love a bit of Settlers of Catan. Have you ever read the almanac, the booklet, the rules? I'm always doing that to double check. if you read any of the almanacs or the rules of games that were invented in the 70s or before, the default player, their pronoun is him.
Mm-hmm.
And as a woman reading that, you have an emotional reaction about you being not included as the player. You are not the player because he is the player. So I think there's a power in pronouns that has been here for decades, but it's only now just coming into our popular kind of consciousness and understanding that when you mislabel someone, it can be hurtful.
Yeah.
And so we need to think about how people want to be treated. And I think there's a golden rule, isn't it? You know, treat people as you would want to be treated. But actually, that golden rule, I think, should be turned into a platinum rule. And the platinum rule is treat people how they want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, especially when you're in business, you want to make sure that you are connecting with your service users and your clients and customers in a way that they want to be treated.
Yeah. And you've reminded me, actually, I went through a stage of when I was writing stuff that I'd always end up sort of trying to put, say, S in parentheses with the he, so that it was inclusive of she, he. But now with they, then, it actually makes that a lot easier. So I know when I'm writing case studies and things now, I just use they, them, their.
Unless it's important. Unless is it important that you're talking about a man? Is it important that you're talking about a woman? Because it might be, but in most terms, I think it's not. And again, coming back to this idea of heteronormativity, the typical experience of people, we understand it to be that when you are born female and you are presenting as feminine, you're attracted to men. That's a typical experience. And there's a word for that we use in inclusion and diversity, and that's cis. So cis, C-I-S, tells us that your sex, gender, and attraction are aligned. It's a Latin word for on the same side as or of. So cis means your sex, your gender, and your attraction are aligned in a heteronormative way. If you're gay, they're not. Well, they could be, because it could be argued I'm cis because I am both female and slightly butch feminine. So therefore I'm aligned, but my attraction is not aligned with the fact that I am a woman. I am not attracted to men. Mm-hmm. And heteronormativity spills over when we assume that all women are attracted to men, that all women wear skirts, that all women do these ultra feminine things, that all men are attracted to women, that all men do these hyper masculine things. And as soon as we don't question that heteronormativity, we're limiting the experience of people, of everyone, not just women, not just gay people. We're limiting the experience based on what we think is normative. And so the idea and the concept of heteronormativity, I think, can be really useful for those people who are kind of grappling with maybe some of these new words and concepts that are coming out now, which aren't new. They're just breaking through into the mainstream.
Yeah. And I think what we're saying with all of this is that, you know, we're not asking people to kind of put labels in, and in fact we're sort of trying to avoid labeling people. You know, what we're trying to do is, like you say, that platinum experience of treating people how they want to be treated. So kind of gathering enough information that actually we can be inclusive, we can be treating people as they want to be treated. So kind of going back to the software design piece, you know, so we've got that, adding that salutation as standards, and to therefore encourage end users to be using that and getting comfortable with that and giving them the option. I know I would say that, I don't know if it's contact data, having the pronouns in there, because then, and actually coding that up so that if you need to be using the pronouns, you know, you can pull those in. I think the other thing for me, particularly thinking in software where you need to have kind of legal documentation, having a kind of a known as field as well as first name and surname and so on, because actually someone might want to be known as a different name, but they haven't changed things like their birth certificate and their driving license and those sorts of things. And so for legal contracts and stuff that needs to go on formal paperwork, those details still need to be used, but then in emails and so on, you're going to want to use the known as and respect how someone wants to be known as. So you almost need that additional field. And I know in some of the HR systems that I've used, that does exist, but I don't think necessarily so much on maybe some of the other systems, like, so for example, CRM systems and those kind of things. But actually, that's to me a fairly easy step for a company to take, that just kind of is more inclusive.
And the root of that entire conversation is that you have to ask. Don't assume that if someone looks like a woman, that their pronouns are she, her. Don't assume, because we're taking this information from this heteronormative world, which is not bad. It just can miss out a huge proportion of people's experiences. I said to you before, I think the experience of 6 to 10% of the population who are LGBTQ is not a small amount. But if we're constantly marginalized and not given words to describe our experiences, that adds to what's called minority stress. So minority stress syndrome is the little microaggressions that happen on a day-to-day basis where you are either marginalized, ignored, othered, and you get a bit of a thick skin about it because the intent is not usually malice, but the impact is that you are out, othered, not out, that you are marginalized, that you aren't included. And so by using pronouns, by asking questions about how people want to be referred to by their chosen names, you're doing the work to make sure you can give them the best experience as a human in the world. And that might not be informed solely by gender, and that might not be informed solely by sex because of our assumptions around these things. So I think it's it can seem quite a scary topic when you don't experience those microaggressions, because you don't want to get it wrong and you don't want to add to potentially being a microaggression. But at the same time, we are humans that want to connect with other humans. And I think by asking questions, it can help you with that platinum rule, because then you'll know how they want to be treated rather than what works for you, because we all are actually different. But you said before about labels, and I think I did this in the session with you. Labels are both really important, and then I know people rally against them and they don't want to be labeled. But there's a power dynamic there. If I label myself and then I tell you what my label is and you use that label, I'm empowered that you're talking to me and understanding me with the words that I've chosen. If you label me and it's wrong, there's a different power there. So at the beginning of my sessions, I have a picture of a cat in a box. And my cat is, I've got cat hair everywhere here. My cat is on my desk right now. I'm a big lover of cats. And my question to anyone who knows cats, what happens when you put a cat in a box?
Cat goes straight out again.
Yeah, the cat goes, no, I don't want to be in this box. No, thank you. What happens if you leave the room that you've put the box down in and you come back a bit later?
The cat's got in the box.
The cat's got in the box because the cat thinks the box is the best place ever. So that's a metaphor. The box is the label. So the metaphor there is you shouldn't label someone else, but listen to how they want to be labeled, because sometimes a label gives people the language and the space to express who they are. Especially if you've not been in charge of the labels. So queer is a really interesting term that historically was defamatory, was not very nice to be called queer. But now we see lots of people take on that label and take on that identity as an umbrella term for not cis, not straight, So queer can mean lots of things. It means it's not that you are not straight. And if someone were to call me queer, that's completely acceptable because I'm not. But historically, it was defamatory. But then the community, whoever the community are, because we're not all the same, took this word back and said, yeah, that we are queer, we are different. And so that's a power. So coming back to the cat in the box, sometimes it might be scary, or you think we're all the same, we don't need labels. If we were all the same, there wouldn't be the power to marginalize, there wouldn't be power and control, there wouldn't be heteronormativity and homophobia, there wouldn't be racism, because we're not all the same, because the structure doesn't value us all the same. So in order to take up that space in the box, sometimes you need labels to tell people and to embody the difference that you are because of the context of the difference. So regardless of what you think about labels, I think sometimes they can be really powerful to people. And I definitely include myself in that. As a gay woman, as a lesbian, I absolutely, if I didn't have the words for that, that wouldn't be a label I could have and own and be proud of. But it also helps that I do have quite a lot of legal rights and responsibilities in this country.
Yeah, and you've that kind of the different power dynamic has really made me think about from a GDPR point of view. So with one of my clients, and I train on their behalf, and in their system there's a notes field, and I always say, you know, be really careful what you put, because it's notes about the person. I said, be really careful about what you put in there. From a GDPR point of view, they have the right to see that. And so if a user was to put a label in there that they have put in, and then under GDPR they did, you know, a subject access request and got that information, I know that could cause a whole host of problems. Whereas if that customer has given them that information in that label, then they can legitimately put that into the system, can't they? Because that helps every member of staff read those notes and understand that person a little bit better, to be able to then have that relationship. And so actually, you know, that's really powerful information, is it? Like, like you say, not putting labels on people, but actually using the labels that they put on themselves to help you.
And the power of who has the power to label and not, in my experience, when we do the exercise about what do these words mean and where do they live, is in the sex, gender or attraction column. I have the word cis, the CIS, meaning aligned with. The majority of people don't know that word, and the majority of people are cis. And the reaction that people show and demonstrate is, why are you labeling me? Because I'm normal. And I think that is the biggest takeaway. No one's normal. Because actually in a dichotomy of normal and not normal, then if you're normal, what does that make me? So understanding and keeping up to date with your knowledge, whether you get awareness training, conscious bias training, LGBT training, I think it's really useful to keep up to date so that you can basically do the best job for your service users and your customers, and talk to them in a way that they want to be talked to. And it can be hard work sometimes, but we have to do it. Yeah,
definitely. Completely agree. So a couple of other things that I want to bring up is, so we've talked about fields in the system, and I know we've talked about this next topic before, and we talked about kind of emails and so on, and documentation, so templates. And I asked you about this before, about the classic "Dear Sir, Madam."
You remember my response because you're laughing.
Yeah. So, but it is, you know, I suppose, you know, a lot of systems will have templates that will use that information in those fields. It will use the salutations, but actually, you know, what do you do when you haven't got certain information and so on? So, but yeah, "Dear Sir, Madam" is kind of very outdated, isn't it? So,
yeah. I train on this as well through my marketing communications business. So Luminescence helps other organizations with their writing, business writing, speaking to people. And when you don't know, you know who you're speaking to in terms of an organization. If it's an organization you're speaking to, use the organization name. because you won't get that right. You're looking for someone in that organization. If you know the title of the person, i.e. the job title, use that. The dear sir, madam, again, is binary and reinforcing that there's either or. If you don't have the person's, we're assuming there, because we don't have the person's gender, we're assuming that it's either or. And again, that's that heteronormative understanding of there is either or. We know that that's not true, because gender is about expression. So I would go with, are you speaking to someone and that you don't know their name? So it could be dear customer. That is gender free. Dear client, that's gender free. The organization, that's not specific. The title of the person. Because what happens if you get it wrong like that, you're alienating that person rather than showing that you just don't know. So I'm sure we've all had these emails that say dear name, and it's obvious that that field hasn't been filled in. But that wouldn't garner a reaction from me as much as it would when I get letters to our company that say dear sirs. In 2022, that is completely unforgivable to me, and I will rip that letter up. I will delete that email. I'm not reading it. Because you can find out that there are 2 women that are directors of my company. It's public information. So dear madams wouldn't even, I wouldn't like that either, because again, that's assuming. But dear sirs is lazy.
Yeah.
It's outdated and it can be offensive.
Yeah.
So if you don't know, use the job titles, the organization, or client customer if you don't have the information. But then circling back round, you should have the information. You should fill out all those the fields. So again, it's about having clean data, understanding you know, what you have in your CRM and your databases, and make sure that it is complete, because people can see through that. But yeah, I rip up if anything says dear sirs, don't ever read it.
And then the other thing that sprang to mind when you were talking a little bit earlier is, have you, in your sort of experience and with the work that you do, have you noticed a difference sort of with generation? So I already mentioned about my daughter, you know, and she is so much more aware. You know, it is part and parcel of her life, whereas when I was her age, it wasn't. Things were different. And you know, like you said, the word queer, you know, it was used very differently sort of in the 80s. And so yeah, I suppose to me, and I'd be interested in your view on this, I feel like it is only going to get more important, because people are probably going to be more offended than maybe previous generations were, because previous generations didn't have the same language, the same kind of view of the world.
And I would add in, we collectively didn't have the same sensitivity, because we collectively were much more heteronormative, typical, white. We were a certain type of people, and the role models that we saw in business, TV, we saw in the public domain weren't other. And I think what's happened over definitely my lifetime, I'm 42. When I grew up, I was immediately disenfranchised from ever being able to get married. Thankfully, that changed. I was disenfranchised from ever being able to be shown in school what someone who was like me would look like at 40. And by that, I mean someone who's gay. I was disenfranchised as a young gay person to ever be able to imagine what my life would be like as an adult gay person. And so what's happened, thankfully, is that we are seeing more role models of difference. And so therefore, it's more important that other people who don't live in that difference understand the importance of acknowledgement and recognizing and using the right terms, or asking the right questions, or being a bit more human and sensitive to other people. And this isn't just in the LGBTQ space. We obviously the past couple of years, when we start to unpick our collective history, we start to realize the history that's been omitted. And so the more we start to learn and know, I think the more sensitive we become, because we think, oh, that's really bad. Oh, like I'm sitting in this I don't know, I'm sitting in this training session and someone just said something that won't land with that person, that won't land with that person, because the more I know about the people I'm surrounded by, the more sensitive I am to make sure that they're all included. So I think that's what we're seeing is change. And from, again, my point of view as a kid growing up in the late 70s, 80s, it's really, really changed. And some of that is, well, not some of it, I think all of that is because of the activists that wanted and pushed for change. Obviously, you have big historical moments in time, and then you have backlashes, and then you have certain amounts of legal privileges that are given because they were never there for you in the first place. So I do an exercise in the training session, one of my training sessions, about trying to put together a timeline of rights and responsibilities for gay people. And that's a real eye-opener, because we still do not have equal rights as humans in the world. And so I think this is something that is a constant change and push. And that's why the 12-year-olds of the world are much more aligned and aware about this dichotomy of gender and sexism and racism, because they're seeing more different stories being platformed. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So you touched on that, and I'm conscious of time, but there are kind of
this is 5 hours, right? That's how much time we've got.
There are definitely two things that I want to make sure that we kind of touch on a little bit more. So you just mentioned about, when you're in a session and you're aware of what's being said, and we before we started recording, we were talking about an example of that in a situation we were both in recently. And I think in our conversation sort of off air, there were two things that jumped out that I really want to kind of touch on, because obviously we're talking about, we're asking software companies to be more aware of this, to be more inclusive. And so I think what we don't want is, we don't want people to be scared. So you mentioned about, heteronormative doesn't mean homophobic. So by kind of trying to move away from the heteronormative language and world and sort of scenarios that we create, we're not actually kind of going to being homophobic or anything. And so people shouldn't be afraid. I think that's what I'm hearing. And then also the other thing that came out when we were talking before we started recording, and you have touched on it briefly, is that whole intent versus impact. So can you just kind of, let's finish off on those areas, because I think those are kind of really key takeaways, so that people feel empowered to make change and not be fearful of making change, and actually improving what they're doing, whether it be in their system design or their marketing materials or in their training programs, but to kind of just think about being more inclusive.
I think the first point about heteronormativity. So again, heteronormativity is, in a way, it's a lazy approach to how everyone experiences the world. It's that you think your normal is the normal. And regardless of whether we're talking about someone's gender or their class or their ability or their race, their culture, I think that's one of the things that we need to be really careful about, is thinking that our normal is everyone else's normal.
Yeah.
So normal, one of my friends said, is a setting on a washing machine. Let's leave it there, because we aren't normal. We're all different, and there's typical experiences. But if we try and kind of take away or unpick that, what is normal, we then start to see that actually no one is normal. So heteronormativity is, again, just saying that if you're a man, you're attracted to women. If you're a man, you are masculine, and this is what you'll like, and you'll buy the toys that are blue, and gender reveal parties, don't get me started. We put a lot of expectation based on sex and gender, which we know in the lived reality isn't actually true. That's heteronormativity. If we can start to unpick that, it allows more space for the human to be themselves, rather than align with what they think they should be in accordance with their sex and gender. It's not, homophobia is fear and hatred of something different, like being gay. That's very specific, rather than just, I would say, a lazy way of not thinking about, I might have said something that doesn't apply. That's more heteronormativity. And then coming back to the intent and impact, I've stolen this from a professor from Berkeley University that did some research about when we're talking to people, we judge our communication based on our intent, but we judge other people's communication by their impact on us. So that's totally different. So we need to think a bit more about our intent and impact at the same time. So when I'm saying, oh, all the women in this class will love this picture of this guy. Well, maybe not all the women, because not all the women might be straight. So they might not fancy this guy that I'm showing a picture of. However, I want to be human and I want to make a joke because they're a good looking person. So you could say something like, if there's anyone else, not a gender, anyone else in the room that thinks this person's as good looking as I do, and then you can move on. We're not trying to diminish someone's personality or character. We're trying to make people alive to the impact of when you, again, sometimes it's lazy. You don't think about the impact on other people. So that the intent and impact, if we can think about what we're trying to say, we're trying to create a bond, we're trying to create trust, we're trying to create a jovial situation where people feel comfortable, then brilliant. Does gender matter in that circumstance? Does sex matter in that circumstance? Do the differences that we experience as people in attraction matter in that circumstance? No, not really, because if you have an even split of people that would find this person attractive and an even split of people that wouldn't, then you're only going to connect with half the audience anyway.
Yeah.
So I think it's about, encouraging people to think and be mindful, but also not to stop the way that you are, because my slice of pie does not get in the way of your slice of pie. Mm-hmm. We have this idea of, if I, as a gay person, asking for more, and again, I have to asking for more rights and responsibilities, that it's being taken away from someone else. That's not how life works. Mm-hmm. So I would really encourage people to think about the impact of what they say. And if you don't know, read loads of stuff. I've got loads of resources that I can give you as an add-on for people who want to read about different people's experiences. Because coming back to the idea of role models, unless you know that people have certain experiences, you don't know. So it's easy to make mistakes. And I think, that's one of the big things when I speak to organizations, is that fear. People don't want to offend. And so therefore, the default shouldn't be don't say anything. The default should be asking.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a perfect way to end this session. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Anna, but it's always really insightful as well. And I will put your contact details in the information below. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, have a conversation with you directly about this, and maybe organise some awareness training for their own employees, and
I would love that.
Their knowledge, that would be fantastic. So thanks again.
That's great, Susanna. Thank you so much.